Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. One of the key themes found in the book of Joshua is the provision of the Lord, in keeping with his promise to Abraham to give to his descendants a land, a seed, and a blessing. God had kept his word and had brought the people of Israel into the promised land and was in the process of dividing up the land among the 12 tribes. And in Joshua chapter 17, verses 3 through 18, we'll see further proof that God provides for his own, and in ways that we may not always recognize. God was willing to meet the needs of his people, coming alongside those in need and making sure that those needs were met. And in the case of those to whom much had been given, God expected much in the way of obedience and faithfulness to his will. He was willing to provide, but expected his people to do their part. And faith on the part of his people is always a major expectation of God for his people. They needed to trust him enough to obey him, doing their part in keeping with his faithful provision for their needs. When reading the Scriptures, there will be times when certain names and events are mentioned that seem to come out of nowhere and make no sense in the context. Today's passage is a case in point. As the author describes the allotment of the land of Canaan to the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, the two sons of Joseph, he suddenly mentions the 5 daughters of Zelophehad. He even provides the names of the 5 women, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. And it's almost as if he expects his audience to be well acquainted with these women and their story. Seemingly out of nowhere, these women appear, making what appears to be a very bold demand of Joshua, Eleazar the priest, and the leadership of Israel. The Lord commanded Moses to give us an inheritance along with our brothers. Joshua 17, verse 4. This is one of those situations where, if we're not familiar with the rest of the Scriptures, we'll find it difficult to understand what's going on. Are these women making up their story? Have they joined forces to fabricate a lie in an attempt to deceive Joshua and finagle a portion of the land for themselves? First of all, it's important to understand the situation in which these women found themselves. They were the sole remaining heirs of their father. He had no sons. And in that culture, the inheritance passed down through the sons. So any allotment of the land would have gone to the sons of Zelophehad, not his daughters. But years earlier, these women had seen the handwriting on the wall and had understood that with their father's eventual death, they would be left unprotected and unprovided for. And when the people finally entered the land of Canaan, they would have no right to a portion of the land. So they had appealed to Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the leadership of Israel. Then drew near the daughters of Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, from the clans of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. The names of his daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. And they stood before Moses and before Eleazar the priest and before the chiefs and all the congregation at the entrance of the tent of meeting, saying, Our father died in the wilderness. He was not among the company of those who gathered themselves together against the Lord in the company of Korah, but died for his own sin. And he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be taken away from his clan because he had no son? Give to us a possession among our father's brothers. Moses brought their case before the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, The daughters of Zelophehad are right. You shall give them possession of an inheritance among their father's brothers, and transfer the inheritance of their father to them. And you shall speak to the people of Israel, saying, If a man dies and has no son, then you shall transfer his inheritance to his daughter. And if he has no daughter, then you shall give his inheritance to his brothers. And if he has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers. And if his father has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to the nearest kinsman of his clan, and he shall possess it. And it shall be for the people of Israel a statute and rule, as the Lord commanded Moses. Numbers 27, verses 1 through 11. Their father had died in the wilderness, leaving them in a sense destitute. They were unmarried and without the protection and provision of a male figure in their lives, a necessary requirement in their culture. But they had been brave and bold enough to appeal their case to Moses and the leadership of Israel. And Moses had wisely taken their case to God. Their whole argument was based on the fact that their father had been a good man, and his death had not been the result of sin against God. So why should the legacy of his name fail to carry on just because he had daughters instead of sons? And God had agreed with the logic behind their argument, telling Moses, The daughters of Zelophehad are right. You shall give them possession of an inheritance among their father's brothers, and transfer the inheritance of their father to them. Numbers 27, verse 7. Not only that, God used their case as a precedent for a new law concerning inheritance. From that point forward, the inheritance of any man who had no sons was to pass on to his daughters. And if a man was childless, his inheritance was to go to his brothers. If he had no brothers, it was to go to his uncles. And if he had no uncles, his inheritance was to go to his nearest living relative. God had taken the plea of these 5 women and turned it into case law, providing for his people a statutory requirement concerning the issue of inheritance. It's important to notice that these women were the ones who came to Joshua and reminded him of the decision handed down to Moses as he had received it from God. Had they not spoken up, there's a good chance they may have forfeited their right to a portion of the land. These women showed extreme faith by making their initial appeal to Moses, but also in bringing their God-decreed right of their father's inheritance before Joshua, Eleazar, and the leadership of Israel. And their faith and fearlessness to stand up for their rights was rewarded with an inheritance among the brothers of their father. Joshua 17, verse 4. We can only imagine that this decision was not well received by their uncles. When Joshua apportioned part of the land to these 5 women, the brothers of Zelophehad lost out. Their portion of the inheritance diminished as a result of the women's request. But it was their God-given right to enjoy their fair share of the inheritance and enjoy the blessings of the land promised by God. The story of the daughters of Zelophehad is the positive side of this chapter, but then the chapter ends with a somewhat sad recounting of the descendants of Joseph, the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim, coming to Joshua and complaining about the inadequacy of their allotment of land. Perhaps it was based on God's decree to give a portion of their land to the 5 sisters. But whatever the case, the descendants of Joseph demanded that they were too large in number to live in the land that they had been given. But part of their problem was that they viewed portions of the land as uninhabitable. Part of it was occupied by well-armed Canaanites. The rest was forested and would require work on their part to clear and cultivate. But Joshua challenged them to do just that. Not only that, he expected them to do what God had commanded them to do, and drive out the Canaanites from the land. Yes, the land was filled with enemies, and part of it was covered by forests. But it was not a case of too little land, but too little faith on the part of the people of Joseph. Trees can be cut down, and Canaanites can be defeated. What God had given to them was more than enough. But the full enjoyment of their inheritance was going to require that they do their part. Joshua reminded them that they had been blessed by God and were a numerous people and have great power. Joshua 17, verse 17. They saw their size as a problem, but Joshua challenged them to see it as a blessing from God. Their superior numbers would give them an advantage over their enemies, and a workforce large enough to clear the trees and cultivate the land. God had adequately provided for their needs, but they were going to have to make the most out of the gift given to them by God.